One of the hardest things to embrace in your Christian walk are trials. A lot of Christians talk about how they go through trials, and oftentimes they're talking about things that vary from very simple inconveniences, like I couldn't find a place to park, to very complex things like dealing with an illness such as cancer or another degenerative disease that has affected them or somebody that they love. And they often speak about it in the way that the world speaks about it. What do I mean by that? The world has a way of facing things. They go through difficult situations and they numb the pain. They numb whatever it is that they're feeling through different kinds of things. And it happens to us as well as Christians that we lose sight of where our comfort actually comes from and how we can derive peace and not just comfort but also sometimes pleasure from the different trials that we face. This was something that I learned from the book of James that really caught my attention as a child growing up in the church, because I couldn't imagine at the time going through trials and being happy about it. It's something that whenever I read it initially, I thought something has to be wrong with this guy, because how can you ever say, I am rejoicing for going through trials? But look at what he says in the book of James, chapter 1. James says, in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Now, a little bit of context here. James is the brother of Jesus, so he knows and is familiar with trials. The powerful thing about this is that he's saying that when trials come, it presents to us an opportunity, and that opportunity isn't just for us to get through the trial, isn't just for us to find a way out, isn't just for us to be comforted in some way. He says it's an opportunity for us to experience great joy. But why would he say that? What would drive that great joy? Well, he continues in the next verse, and he says, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. So for James, it was very clear that as we grow through trials, our faith and our endurance is built. And faith is what gives us the drive to get through not just difficult times, but anything that this life throws at us. And one thing is for sure, Jesus makes it very clear that we will face trials in this life. But how do we get through trials with an attitude that helps us not only succeed, but make Christianity and make the gospel contagious to other people? Well, we do it through joy. But here's the thing, what James is pointing out, the secret behind all of this, is that that joy and faith and all of that is developed as we pass through trials over time. So as we go through difficult situations that we are presented with, and we go through them as and looking at them as an opportunity for great joy, then we will grow, and our endurance and our faith and our trust in God will grow. It's like saying to my kids, hey, let's go outside and play this sport. And initially they'll be like, oh, I don't want to do that, because they may think that it may be too hard, it may be too hot. But if they finish that activity feeling joy, then the next time that I ask them to do something, they're going to have less of an expectation of pain. And I'm not saying that going through trial is not going to mean pain. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that you will grow from your previous trials if you reserve them and you keep them in your heart and you look for the opportunity. Because in every single moment that is trying and that is difficult, there is also an opportunity presented by God. And we're not talking about somebody that's unacquainted with difficulty and trial. The Bible makes it very clear that Jesus went through various trials. And we're not just talking about the cross. We're talking about days where he spent fasting and praying. We're talking about lots of ridicule and scoffing and actual people wanting to hurt him and kill him. Adversity at every turn. He wasn't a rich kid growing up. There was adversity even as a child when, in some of the accounts that we have of him moving around, we see accounts of adversity throughout the entire Bible. People like Moses that we admire, we say Moses was such an amazing character. He was such an amazing person. And yet Moses also went through many trials, not to mention the fact that he lived in the desert for 40 years, even before he went before Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And by the way, if you don't know who Moses is, Moses was this big looming character in the Bible who went in front of the Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And God, through him, actually brought down some plagues on Egypt, and Pharaoh eventually lets them go. I know that some movies like Prince of Egypt that Disney made are depicting this biblical character, Moses. Everybody admires him, and he's this huge looming figure throughout all of the Bible, and he comes up time and time again. But Moses went through many, many trials. He lived in the desert for 40 years before he saw this burning bush, and God eventually calls him to take the people out of Egypt. But he then goes back to the desert after they come out of Egypt. And this is something that a narrative that you're going to see throughout the entire Bible over and over again. You're going to see that when God creates this freedom, this liberation for someone or for some people, and that in the case of the Israelites, it's not always liberation that leads them to the promised land. It is liberation that leads them into the desert, which then purifies them, and then they eventually go to the promised land. And this is what the book of Deuteronomy has to say about that, because God is very clear about the fact that there are things in us that need to be taken out in order for us to progress and grow in our faith. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 through 5. It says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years, humbling you and testing you to prove your character." The fact is that God doesn't need for you to go through a trial for him to see what's inside of your heart. He already knows. But we live in denial, and we tend to deny the truth about who we really are. That's one of the biggest things that we deny. I know that I've denied it time and time again. But trial has a way of pulling out all of the gunk, all of the garbage, all of the negative things in our character that needs to be taken out. And so when we go through those difficult situations, all of that stuff comes to the surface, and it can be purified by God's cleansing fire. And so what we see here is God telling the people of Israel, "Hey, don't forget about the time that you were in the desert. It was for a purpose. I wanted to bring out what was in your heart." And it says, "To find out whether you would obey his commands." Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that comes through the mouth of the Lord. So just like James, there is a very clear a connection between faith and trials that the book of Deuteronomy is pointing out. Actually, Moses, who wrote Deuteronomy, is pointing out. And so we see that in order for our faith to grow, we need to go through trials. One of the reasons why this happens is so that we can really see what's in our hearts. And by seeing what's in our hearts, we can actually find repentance, we can find cleansing through the power of God. So if we don't go through trials, we may not know who we really are. If we don't go through trials, we may not know what's actually in there. It's only through these moments of difficulty that we find out not just who we are, because that's what I've been saying through the entire video, right? But who God actually is. And as we know who he is, we can learn to depend on him and trust him more no matter what comes our way. And so in the future, when something pops up after you've had some rotations with trial and overcoming and faith, and your faith is growing and your endurance has seen a growth and hypertrophy, so to speak, right? If you've gone through a few iterations of that, then what's going to happen is once another trial comes, you're going to sit back and say, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen at the other side of this, but I know the God who's going to see me through it. And I know that he was with me before, so I know he'll be with me today. And I know that if something comes tomorrow, he'll be with me tomorrow. And no matter what comes my way, because I've learned to trust and depend on the one who's held me through all these times, I can face whatever comes my way. That is faith that is tried in fire. That is faith that has built endurance. That is faith that only comes when we go through hardship and we go through it with the power of God who sees us through to the other side. Like he did for Moses, like he did for Joseph, like he did for David, like he did for Elijah, like he did for Isaiah, like he did for John the Baptist, like he did for Jesus, and like he wants to do for you. So today's invitation is to rejoice, and not just rejoice when things are going great, because there are going to be moments when things are going great and life is fantastic and you're living in the honeymoon of life, you're drinking the milk and you're eating the honey. But there are going to be times when things are just going to be hard. And you need to know that in those moments, God is with you as well. Just because you're going through a hardship doesn't mean that He's abandoned you. It just may mean that some things need to come out so that you can learn to depend on Him and not on yourself, not on a crutch, not on an idol, not on a thing, maybe not even on a person, that you just need to lean on Him. And so when you do, you'll come out of it on the other side a better version of yourself and a more prepared version to deal with adversity, to deal with hardship, and to be a better beacon of light to attract others to the same source of life, love, healing, power, and energy that you're connected to. We call him Jesus, our Savior. I hope that you can find him today. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.